are so excited to move the time so that we can chat with someone who has been a big influence on a lot of us here at CARP, and has been involved with the workings of CARP since its inception. So we're really excited to learn from William Benoit today. Most of you have heard me run through this intro before, so I'll keep it quick here, but the CARP Research Lab is a loose collection of international and interdisciplinary scholars studying character assassination in realms across social life, including politics, science, and entertainment. And I think we'll probably focus in on that first part on politics today with our guest here. We host conferences, we publish scholarship and teach courses, workshops, and seminars. So excited to be able to do some online learning with one, as I mentioned, of our favorite CARP affiliates today. And in fact, our guest today has published a chapter in the Routledge Handbook of Character Assassination and Reputation Management. So you can read more of his work there, although he has published so much that you can find it in all sorts of locations, not just in our book here. And for those of you that are joining us hoping to learn more about character assassination and reputation, this book that you see on the screen was new last year, and it represents our attempt at creating sort of a primer or a textbook for folks starting to learn about the topic. So that might be of interest to you as well. Should you want to learn more about CARP Lab's efforts, you can follow us on Twitter or on Instagram, and our website is carpresearchlab.org. So without further ado, though, let me introduce our main guest for today, William Benoit, who is a distinguished professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I did not make up that he's distinguished. He, of course, is distinguished, but that is his title at the university. Like I mentioned, his accomplishments and publications are utterly mind-boggling and far too many to list here, but he is the author of hundreds of articles and many books on image repair theory. And again, you can find him in our handbook of character assassination and reputation management. So I'm going to kick it over to Sergei Samolenko of George Mason University, who is going to start our conversation. But as always, I know I see a lot of familiar names on the participants list here. So thank you for your support of CARP Lab. And don't hesitate to enter questions or comments that you have for our speakers in the chat, and we will be sure to leave time to get those answered and to have a great conversation after we hear what our distinguished guest has to say. My words that time, but take it away, Serge.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, it's again my pleasure. I'm really proud and humbled to present Bill. So he will give a short presentation. So he has PowerPoint slides to share, and then it will be followed by my questions as well as Q&A from the audience.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. And I've found the CARP program to be very useful in my own teaching and research. And so I appreciate it. This talk is about attacks on character and Republican selfies against Trump, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. What I particularly want to draw your attention to is the UAB mascot, Blaze. I think he's really cool. I appreciate being invited to talk about my work today. And I want you to know I've examined persuasive attack against Democrats as well as Republicans. It's not my fault that Donald Trump attracts so many criticisms, providing many examples for me to investigate. When I say persuasive attack, you may want to think character assassination. Persuasive attack, as perhaps you all know, is both bad and good. Attacks can be bad, vicious attacks, lies, scandalous slurs. And I like the alliteration there, scandalous slurs, or they can be scurrilous insults. And While there's no alliteration there, I really wanted to get the word scurrilous into my talk at some point. Attacks can also expose wrongdoing, child labor, excuse me, sexual abuse, abuse of power, among other things. Attacks can also aid decision making by pointing out true weaknesses in people, groups, corporations, and countries. So we need to know both the pros and the cons to make an effective decision. But most people are likely to tell you only their pros, and they may exaggerate or lie about some of them. So persuasive attack, as long as you don't lie about someone else, can expose that wrongdoing. And I want to say today, when I was looking at my internet, the pages I visit, House or Senate Majority Leader Schumer and House Minority Leader Jeffries sent a letter to Fox News. I don't know if you've been following the Dominion Corporation's lawsuit against Fox News. Dominion sells voting equipment, and Fox News said that the Dominion voting machines had been misused. And so Dominion sued Fox for $1.6 billion. And one of the most recent things that has come out has been emails between the various Fox hosts and executives that clearly note that they knew the argument that the election had been stolen was a lie, and yet they went on to promote it. At one point, one of the executives says, "This isn't about politics. It's not about red or blue. It's about green. We're appealing to our audience," even if he didn't say it quite like that. He did say it was about green. But what he meant was, we're trying to save our audience, even if it means we have to lie. And in this letter that was sent on Wednesday, the letter says, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and other Fox personalities knowingly, repeatedly, and dangerously endorsed and promoted the big lie that Donald Trump won the presidential election. Does anyone see a persuasive attack here? I do. Though your network has acknowledged your regret, your network hosts continue to promote, spew, and perpetuate election conspiracies to this day. And I really like the word spew in this context. By your own account, switching from blame to offensiveness, Donald Trump's election lies were damaging. Despite that shocking admission, Fox hosts have continued to peddle election denialism to the American people. We demand that you direct Tucker Carlson and other hosts on your network to stop spreading false election narratives and admit on air that they were wrong to engage in such negligence. And it goes on. But to me, since I believe all the research that says there was no significant election stealing, this illustrates how persuasive attack can be used to call out bad behavior and urge things be improved. So persuasive attack can be bad and scurrilous, like claiming the election was stolen. That's bad and scurrilous, but it can also do good as well. My talk today, excuse me, is based on a forthcoming book. Along with Kevin Stein and Matt Barton, we've written a book called Persuasive Attack, Threatening Reputations in Public Discourse. And this is currently in press with Peter Lang. Today, I want to talk mainly about selfies and politics. Google reports that billions of selfies are uploaded each year, although of course not all of the billions are about politics, but some of them are. During President Donald Trump's reelection campaign in 2020, the Lincoln Project was created by Republicans who opposed his reelection campaign. They're also known as Republican voters against Trump. This group invited Republicans to upload selfies expressing their concerns about Donald Trump. In 5 months, this group attracted 104,000 subscribers and 30 million views. So these messages were seen by many people. Josh, they identify their contributors only by their first name and state, uploaded a video explaining his concerns about President Trump. This video, not all of them, but this one was viewed more than 1 million times on Twitter and more than 100,000 times on RVAT's YouTube channel. Many of these selfies listed their Republican or conservative credentials, how they donated to the party, how they served as elected officials. So this wasn't a bunch of liberals attacking a Republican. These were Republicans identifying weaknesses they saw of a Republican. My sample consisted of 339 video samples, at least one from every one of the 50 states. These messages, I also study political communication, and I divide messages into those about character or personality and those about policy or actions. These selfies stressed character much more heavily than policy, 71% to 29%. Incidentally, this may surprise you, but in the research I've done, and I have to say I've done quite a bit of it, candidate messages, with few exceptions, stress policy more than character, but these selfies talk mainly about character. This talk focuses on the policy attacks, not the 29%, on the character attacks, not the 29% policy attack. Rob, for example, said Trump committed the 7 deadly sins: gluttony, avarice, pride, sloth, anger, lust, and envy. That's a clear character attack. Cindy said he was a liar, a bully, and amoral. Based on both what Anita Pomerantz wrote about complaints and on Fishbein and Eisen, who analyze an attitude as consisting of a belief and a value, I believe that both image repair, which I'm not really talking about here, and persuasive attack has 2 elements. Blame, the target possesses a trait, and offensiveness, the trait is reprehensible. These ideas correspond to Fishbein and Eisen, 2 elements of an attitude, a belief, and a value. Okay. I have argued there are 3 areas of character attacks. Personal qualities, such as you're an idiot; leadership ability, such as you can't organize people; and ideals, such as you are immoral. And I didn't really do a full content analysis, but my rough tabulation indicates that in the Republican selfies against Trump, 71% of the character attacks were about personal qualities, 16% were about leadership ability, and 14% were about ideals. Because I like texts so much, several examples of attacks on personal qualities: he lies about everything; he's mean; he's vindictive; he acts like a 2-year-old. His serial lies, his overt racism, his corruption, his bullying, his misogyny. Character attack on personal qualities. Trump is a child, dangerous child. Trump is obviously venal and crass person. Okay, so those all illustrate how you can criticize someone's personal qualities. It's also possible to criticize their leadership ability, which I consider part of character. This guy couldn't lead his way out of a paper bag. There's no room for competence in Trumpism. He's so unqualified. Donald Trump is totally unfit for office. He's incompetent. Okay, and then there are also selfie attacks on Trump's ideals. Donald Trump is an immoral person. Donald Trump is morally corrupt. There's nothing conservative about Trump seeing conservatism as ideology. President Trump has no morals. He's undermining our most cherished values. Okay. The belief that a target has a trait, remember there are two components of an attack, belief that they have a trait and offensiveness of that trait, can be intensified or elaborated. You can just say he's immoral, or you can intensify that by saying he's the most immoral human being in the history of the world, which makes it even more serious an accusation. I informally counted 45 instances where these Republicans talked about the extent of a trait that Trump possessed. 4 times they said he acted consistently with his trait. He made statements consistent with his trait, and criticized in these videos 16 times. He associates with the unsavory people. I can't talk today. Contrasted him with respected people. Now, I want to give you some textual examples to see what I mean by this. Donald Trump lies. He lies on a daily basis, if not on an hourly basis. Clearly, this influences the belief that Trump extensively lies. He doesn't just lie occasionally, hasn't just lied once. He lies hourly. He has zero diplomacy, zero humanity, and is essentially probably not even human. So this again stresses the extent of these negative personality traits alleged of the former president. This man dodged the draft 5 times. Seeing him speak to cadets at West Point, which, as I'm sure you know, is a military academy, is like inviting a pedophile to be a clown at a child's birthday party. 5-time draft dodger. Donald Trump is an extremely ruthless and immoral person, says Mark. He's 100% unqualified for the job. Not slightly, not mostly, but 100% unqualified. Everything changed when a Category 5 hurricane called Donald Trump came roaring through. Those of you probably know, Category 5 is the most severe hurricane possible, and that's Trump. Some examples of his arguing that his behavior is consistent with belief. He's a racist, he's a xenophobe, he's continued his politics, he's catered to racist and xenophobic elements of society. He cozies up to dictators, authoritarian tyrants, despots, and he disrespects our allies. All these actions consistent with the character defect he sees, Mark. Placing trust in President Xi is one of the greatest acts of presidential incompetence in history. Steve says he's not just incompetent, but the way he dealt in his foreign policy with China was the worst kind of behavior consistent with his trait in history. Some of these selfies said that Trump made statements consistent with his traits. Charles said, I am so disturbed by Trump's repeated callousness to the select few of our citizens who volunteered to defend our nation with their lives. Trump's rhetoric just keeps getting worse. The discriminating, putting down women and people and name calling. And of course, Trump is particularly famous for giving derogatory nicknames to people. A person who has called our FBI scum, who's denigrated POWs, decorated combat war veteran heroes, and Gold Star families. These are statements that Trump has made that's consistent with his unfavorable personal quality. Trump was accused of being an incompetent leader. And what did he do? He told us COVID was a hoax, that it would go away. He promoted nonsense cures. I don't know if you remember drinking bleach. And I shudder to think. It's also possible to attack someone by saying they're associated with bad people. Trump is as clueless and inept as Herbert Hoover and as vindictive as Richard Nixon. I think that says it all. Harvey said he openly admires dictators like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. So this puts Trump in the same category as other people whom most people don't like or respect. Has surrounded himself with corruption. This president has numerous convicted felons in his inner circle. He's a diehard Putin puppet. I remember in one of the presidential debates, Hillary Clinton accused him of being Putin's puppet. And he said, "No puppet, no puppet," which was a defense of sorts. You could attack someone by contrasting them with people who are respected. President Reagan did not feel the need to demonize his political rivals. He never called Americans names. He never called the free press enemies of the people. And of course, remember that we're talking about Republicans attacking Republicans. So for many Republicans, President Ronald Reagan was like a god. And according to Sean, Trump is completely unlike Reagan. I do not believe the current president shares Lincoln's views on equality. And again, President Abraham Lincoln is a revered part of our history. And Donna is saying Trump is not like Lincoln. Also, shifting away from beliefs, we can talk about values associated with an attack on character. I give a particularly repulsive example of the trait. There's only one example of that I found. You can argue people are negatively affected by this trait. I found 3 of those. To illustrate a repulsive example of a trait, Republicans don't put children in cages, which to me seems reprehensible, but that happened at the border with immigrants. People negatively affected by the trait. What he's done to children at the border is unconscionable. The damage, the horrific abuse of these precious children who are innocent. They've done nothing wrong, but Trump did, according to Tiana. There are 130,000 Americans that no longer get to see tomorrow's sunrise because of his abysmal mismanagement of the coronavirus. So his horrible leadership led to the deaths of at least 130 million Americans. At the time this selfie was recorded, the death toll from COVID, unfortunately, is higher now. Oh, good. I have some takeaways. Messages from ordinary people, not politicians or consultants. And most of the research that I've done looks at, in political areas, looks at debates or TV spots or acceptance addresses or announcement speeches. These are messages from ordinary people illustrating persuasive attack. We do not often see analyses of selfies, despite their frequency in today's social media. Google says there are billions of them, although not all in politics. All 3 topics, personal qualities, leadership ability, ideals, can be found in these messages. We see both components of an attack, belief and value. We see the various strategies for elaborating or intensifying the components of an attack. I think it would be interesting to examine persuasive attacks in other social media message. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bill.
You're very welcome.
Well, happy to have you here again, and we can start with questions. So I'll take the liberty of asking my questions first, and then I will read questions from the chat. So the first question I have for you, I mean, you've studied character attacks and image repair for many decades. So in your opinion, what has changed in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years when it comes to your assessment of the prevalence of incivility in today's society. And we can talk about the political sphere, and you can talk about also business, because you also studied a lot of corporate world, right, communication.
I think corporations do attack one another, but they're far secondary to the attacks that occur in politics. And we've always had attacks in politics. There was a little song about "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" accusing a presidential candidate of having a child out of wedlock. And this was sometime in the 1800s. So personal attacks have been going on for years. And in fact, when I was working on the Persuasive Attack book with Kevin and Matt, I found a book that talks about how priests abuse parishioners, that was published in, I think, 1180. So abuse and attacks have been going on for a long time. Having said that, I think Donald Trump broke all the rules. He was more vicious and vindictive, and I try to remain politically neutral, but with him I find it very difficult. He had nasty names for people. The election lies about it being stolen and trying to get false electors for the election. I mean, he was very vicious, and other politicians, some Democratic, but mostly Republicans, who were appealing to the same base as Trump, followed his leads and made many vicious character attacks. So I think politics has become more coarse, more scurrilous, more vicious. But I want to say, I wrote another book. Sorry, I can't help talking about it, called The Rise and Fall of Mass Communication. And Andy and I argued that mass communication rose because of two factors. Population increased, which meant there was a larger potential audience, and technological advances allowed more people to be reached by a single message. And in the 1970s, we didn't have the internet. We certainly didn't have social media. We didn't have VCRs or DVDs or CDs. So about the only thing we had was ABC, CBS, NBC, maybe a weak PBS station. So, for example, when the Nixon-Kennedy debates were on, if your television was on, you watched the Nixon-Kennedy debates. Now, there are many choices for people who'd like to avoid watching debates. But that increase in the mass media, we argue, changed when technology advanced so far. The internet erupted, as did social media. And the number of networks increased. It wasn't just ABC, CBS, NBC. There was MSNBC and Fox News and One American Network. And what this had the effect of doing was splintering audiences, so that ABC, NBC, and CBS all had pretty much the same news every night. But CNN and Fox News do not have the same news every night. And especially when you follow a Facebook page or a Twitter feed, you get very different information. And shockingly, well, not really, but I say that anyway. Shockingly, one way to attract audience to your network or your Twitter feed is to use vicious attacks. So this technology, while the internet, which I'm happily using today for this Zoom talk, has many great benefits, but it comes with serious costs. And one of those costs is it exacerbated the splintering of audiences, and it exacerbated the coarseness of discourse. You could go on Twitter or Facebook and find, and I don't know, some chat thing, there are others, and find vicious attacks you could never find in the 1950s or 1960s. And of course, when the basic premise of image repair is when my reputation is attacked, I have an impulse, a motive to respond. So the attacks feed into image repair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. And so my follow-up question actually has to do with the effectiveness of those attacks. There is a claim, since we have more of those attacks happening every day, and since those attacks become more vicious, the claim is that the audience pretty much have seen the normalization of this incivility in public discourse and got desensitized in a sense, right? So in other words, how effective are these attacks anymore if everyone is using them and they've pretty much been normalized in public discourse, right? So does it mean that it's easier for politicians just to get away with using those attacks, and not a lot of them actually stick to their political opponents?
I think for many people, sadly, this negative tone has become normalized, but it hasn't become normalized for me. I get upset when I see vicious attacks. And I like to think there are maybe 5 or 10 other people in the world who feel the same way. But you're right. I think that the more times, say, someone says, you're a terrible skunk, eventually that has less of an impact on those who hear it. But I think persuasive attacks do still have some effects. They are persuasive messages. And in many cases, because I don't know if I've made this very clear, the fragmentation of audiences has polarized audiences. So when you use an attack in your Twitter feed, it's likely to be seen by people who follow you and who like you, or maybe you're a reporter and you want to report on it. But many of these attacks are going to those people who are most receptive to those criticisms. So I do think there's been a normalization, and there's been somewhat of an attenuation of the impact of persuasive attacks, but I think they're still very powerful.
Thank you. So you also studied crisis communication and crisis management. And so my question is about the image repair now. So what has changed in recent years in terms of image repair and image restoration, if we're talking about the kind of preemptive inoculation against those attacks, maybe actual crisis communication when those attacks happen, and maybe getting back to normal, when your political scandal is over?
One thing that is in politicians and corporations' best interest is that the nation tends to have a short attention span. And with so much going on in the world, and us being aware of so much that's going on in the world, it's hard to focus on one scandal continuously. Other things, human beings have a short attention span, and there was a study that was done by psychologists, in the 1960s maybe, that said most people can remember like 5 to 9 things at once, hold it in their short-term memory. And even if it's in your long-term memory, if you have a negative attitude towards someone, if it's not activated because other events, other news are occupying your attention, it doesn't affect your behavior so much. In fact, I want to give a shout out for the new edition of my book. For literally years, I've had 14 strategies, and I just decided there are 16. And one of the new strategies I call deflect attention. And deflect attention attempts to move the audience away from thinking about the accusations against you to thinking about something else. It's sometimes called whataboutism. And you may have heard, but what about Benghazi? What about Benghazi is not an attempt to defend against the accusation against you. It doesn't say anything about the accusation against you. It tries to get you to think about Benghazi, which many people held was a weakness of Hillary. The recent Prime Minister of the United Kingdom had a campaign advisor, and he talked about how his advisor told him about the dead cat strategy. And the dead cat strategy is when you're at the dining room table and you're arguing about something, and particularly when you're being criticized, you throw a dead cat on the table. And it isn't about that there's a dead cat. They're talking about the dead cat. They're not talking about you. And I have to say, I'm sorry if I sound biased, but I've documented many examples of where President Trump used deflect attention or whataboutism to try to deflect criticisms against him. Now, Democrats have done it. I wrote a piece about the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs, about the Bay of Pigs, which hasn't circulated very widely, in which we supported the Cubans who invaded the Bay of Pigs to try to recapture it from Castro, and it failed miserably. And Kennedy gave a speech to preempt Castro from attacking him by saying, none of our troops were involved, which was true. But at that point in time, Castro hadn't attacked us. And in fact, Khrushchev, who was the main leader of the Soviet Union, hadn't attacked us. But Kennedy, in his speech about the Bay of Pigs, talked about Soviet troops going across Russia, Soviet tanks going across Russia. So he was using deflect attention. Don't think about the American-sponsored invasion of Cuba. Think about Russian tanks invading Czechoslovakia. And I think many people use this strategy. Now, to sort of shift gears and try not to talk about myself and my work so much, I think apologies have become more common, become more expected, but I think some of them are what I would call pseudo-apologies. A real apology would say, I'm sorry my offensive remarks offended you. But people who don't like to admit they've ever done anything wrong are more likely to say, I'm sorry if anything I said offended you, which sort of puts the onus on you. It wasn't anything I did, it's the way you reacted to my actions or behaviors. So I think apologies are more expected now, but I don't know that they're necessarily much better now.
Thank you, Bill. Actually, we are here to talk about you and your research, and I would like to ask you a question posted here by Rod Carver about your third edition of the image repair book. What are the 2-3 major updates from the second edition? And maybe you can just talk about some of the conceptual contribution to the field.
Okay, if you want. The main theoretical advance, in my opinion, I'm obviously biased, is that I articulate 2 new strategies, deflect attention, and the other one, which I don't see as nearly as important as deflect attention, is straw denial. And I illustrate that when President Trump had COVID and was in the hospital, they asked his physician if he was on oxygen. And he apparently perceived that as a criticism, a weakness of Trump. And so he said, no, he's not on oxygen. But has he ever been on oxygen while he's in the hospital? No, no, I can tell you right now, he's not on oxygen. No oxygen is being administered right now. But has he ever, so he refused to answer the question. He appeared to deny the accusation, but he didn't really deny. He denied something else, something that's related. All the case studies in the third edition are new, and several of them are recent. I talk about Southwest Airlines and the catastrophic meltdown and cancellations in December. I talk about the baby formula shortage. Boston City Council just issued an apology for slavery. I consider that third-party image repair, where one person apologizes for what someone else has done, and that's fairly recent. So there are all new case studies and case studies on a variety of topics. The end.
Thank you. So I have a question from CARP's co-founder, Eric Shirai, who is asking you about what would you do to repair Trump's image, assuming he has agreed to follow your advice. So I'll listen to you, and then I'll just follow up with kind of my thought on that as well.
OMG. I have written somewhere, God knows where, I don't, that communication is powerful, but it's not all powerful. And I guess I would have to say Trump's image doesn't need repairing or restoring with some of his hardcore followers. But there are others where I don't know that there's anything that I or anyone else could say that would make Trump universally loved. Image repair is powerful, but it's not that powerful. Had I been advising him from the beginning, and if he'd listened to him, which I doubt he would have, maybe he'd have more hope. But part of his appeal, I believe, and I'm not the first person or the only person to have said that, was that many of his supporters thought he was genuine, honest, and open, and that you could believe what he said because he said so many incredible things. And so that was part of his brand. So I'm sure Trump would like to be more popular than he is, but there's a limit to what you can do.
All right. Yeah, and actually, I second that, because I believe you can also have a good and bad reputation at the same time. And if they strategically use, bad reputation can really help, especially if you are disliked by the opponents and the political rivals. So it adds more to kind of your endorsement within your own audience. So
Certainly.
I think, yeah. So, all right, we have a question from John. If audiences are splintered and forming segregated factions, is there a way to reconcile them together without something massive like a national tragedy?
You know, that's a good question. And I think I may have said before, but I think the internet and social media have many benefits. But living in what some people call virtual information silos is not one of the benefits of the internet. And I gave a talk about the rise and fall of mass media on Monday, and one of the things I came up with was one thing that can help. I don't think anything can solve this fragmentation problem, is education. The more educated people are in general, the more they're likely to consider the source of the information they're being exposed to. The more likely they'll try to access information to make up their minds. So I'm not smart enough to think of any solution to information siloing, but I do think what we do as educators is one of the best responses available to us.
Thank you. I would like to ask you a question about your image repair theory in terms of its kind of theoretical strength. And I believe personally that it's really high on parsimony and empirism. You know, it really generates a lot of new ideas and hypotheses, and it's easy to understand. We have some distinguished scholars in our audience right now, like Josh Compton. He's a guru on like inoculation theory. He's working on his own kind of hybrid version of image repair, where he's kind of connecting image repair and inoculation theory. And I think it's a great conceptual framework. So can you talk a little bit how image repair has been used in connection with other concepts, like maybe stealing thunder or a situational crisis communication theory by, Tim Combs and many others?
Okay, put me on the spot here. There are a lot of very interesting strands of research on crisis communication or image repair. And I try to dabble in them a little bit at a time. For example, one of the points I made in the article about the Bay of Pigs invasion was that Kennedy stole Castro's thunder by giving his speech first. So stealing thunder is something that you can do in image repair. And there are a number of key authors, unfortunately, I'm blanking on them at the moment, who've written on stealing thunder, and some of them cite image repair. I'm really reluctant to say this, but I'll go ahead. There have been a couple of literature reviews on apologia or image repair in communication and in public relations, and I'm pretty sure they all said my theory was the most commonly cited. So I know it's being used by other people, but there probably are people who've incorporated bits of my theory, but I just can't keep up reading everything that's published. So I can't say much more than that, except to say hi, Josh, because obviously I know your work.
Thank you. So I'll try to combine two comments here. One is basically asking about the link between image repair and persuasive attack and misinformation. So basically, if you have seen how persuasive attack been used in misinformation campaigns recently, and how would you advise people use image repair against it? And the second one, if you've seen any character attacks kind of based on kind of appearance of the speaker. So it has to do with visual communication, I guess.
Well, I'm pretty sure Trump did that. Didn't he say that Ted Cruz's wife was ugly? So clearly that's occurred. I said before that my work builds on a concept from Anita Pomerantz that I've seen parallels to Fishbein and Eisen, that there is a blame or responsibility component, and then there is an offensiveness or value component. And that's true in persuasive attack. You have to say someone has an action or a character trait, and that's the blame or responsibility part, and that it's offensive. And image repair works on undermining blame and offensiveness. And image repair also throws in mortification and corrective action. But the same ideas, that a person's face or image or reputation is dependent on beliefs and values, or blame and offensiveness, runs through all my work. And if I ever decide to write about creating images, which I don't really need to because my wife has a lovely book on acclaiming, I would work the same two concepts when you're trying to create an image or an impression, as well as to rehabilitate it or undermine it. I sort of lost the thread of your question.
That's okay, you answered it. So
oh, good.
The next question is wonderful, by Rod again. If education is the answer, how does this occur when you have anti-education movements in states like Florida, Arkansas, Texas, and so on?
Well, I didn't say it would be easy, and it won't be easy. And I don't know if the best education possible for everyone could eliminate the problem. I'd like to think that's true, but I will note that I've been reading recently that students in Florida are protesting against DeSantis's changes to higher education. And maybe that will help some of the anti-intellectual prejudice.
Thank you. We have guests from Greece. So Tony Aspriadis is asking, Greece is living the worst train accident in its history. What would you advise to the government to follow as an image restoration strategy for handling the rage of people against things that the government did not do for infrastructure security?
Well, I don't make any predictions that says simple denial is always the most effective image repair strategy, or minimization will always work, because I think every image repair situation is contextually bound. So it makes a difference to me, and to my theory anyway, whether the government was actually responsible, whether they had neglected, and also, they say, what did he know and when did he know it? Was the government aware of its shortcomings in this area? And I think if the government was aware that it should have done things it didn't, then they have, in my opinion, they really have to use corrective action. They have to fix mass transit, be seen to be fixing mass transit. I'll throw out as an aside, they should invite civilians, ordinary citizens, to be on advisory panels to sort of both to involve them and to give the impression that they are being involved. My understanding is there was a train wreck in Ohio, and that was, at least in part, in its early days, yet I haven't seen all the reports, a part of the train and decisions that the train made, and not just the railroads or the government. So I think if the trains shared in the responsibility, perhaps the government had not maintained the tracks well, and yet the trains drove at unsafe speeds, the government might want to shift the blame in part. But to me, especially if the facts, I don't think you should ever lie, but especially if the facts are out there that it was the government's fault, they really need to come clean, and they need to say, we are sorry, we made a mistake, and we will not make that mistake in the future. But it depends upon what the facts are.
Thank you. So we have a question from a scholar from Indonesia about the which you already answered. So about whether image repair can use to defend against character attacks. But I would like to ask a question in relation to whether you have seen the interplay between culture and context in relation to image repair. In other words, so is this a universal theory, or do those strategies change according to some cultural or social norms and particular context where it happens?
Well, I think the strategies are universal and remain, except that I just added 2 more strategies. Chris Drumheller and I wrote a paper about, there was an American submarine in the Pacific, and I think it had some VIPs on board, and whoever was running, the captain of the ship, wanted to show off to them. So they did this full blast surfacing, and they happened to run into a Japanese trawler, and I'm pretty sure they killed a bunch of people. So the Secretary of the Navy gave a statement about that included some mortification and apology. However, Chris and I found that in Japanese culture, it's not enough to make a generally available public apology like that. You have to come to see the victims in person and apologize to them. So we thought that this image repair effort did not do well because it was apparently unaware of local customs and culture. So sure, culture can have an influence on what the expectations are and how image repair works and when it doesn't work. Thank you,
All
Chris,
right.
by the way, for helping me get that example.
Thank you. All right, Bill. So we have about 2 minutes before the end. So would you like to ask any questions yourself, or do you have any concluding remarks?
I just want to say that I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my research, and that I also appreciate the opportunity to address such an interested and involved audience. I appreciate the questions that you asked, and I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Jenny, would you like to conclude?
Well, I don't really think that I have anything else to say other than it has been a true pleasure and delight to get to learn more about your research. And perhaps someday us CARP Lab faculty will have written so much that we can't even remember in what papers we have published particular ideas or theories. But
Oops.
truly, your work is an inspiration for us at CARP Lab, and thinking about not just how characters get attacked, but how they can potentially be repaired, and what responses and the field of options that are out there for folks is, me as a rhetorical critic, is always something that I'm interested in. So found this exceptionally delightful, and would echo again what you said, that great questions in the chat. And so thank you to all of our wonderful CARP affiliates here who have joined us today to keep a great conversation going. So thank you to the spectators and interlocutors for joining us, and a big warm thank you from CARP Lab for joining us as well, Bill.
And I think CARP Lab is just great, and I appreciate all the contributions you have and are making to the field.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you all. Have a great weekend.